It is messy. You have blue things.
No, dude, it's an absolute mess.
I did soldering yesterday. Oh, sorry, soldering.
Soldering.
Yeah. Soldering.
Soldering. I did it
That is the one word that's still. Anyway, I did some soldering yesterday for the first time in about 20 years.
Yeah.
To fix my daughter's, like it was a pony, like a hobby horse.
Hobby horse. Yeah, it's like a broomstick with a horse's head.
Yeah, and this one has little buttons in the ears, so that maybe you can do this one and it makes like a magic sound. This one makes a clip clop and the neigh sound. And the one that made the neigh sound was broken. So Rach had unstitched the ear because she has all the sewing gear, and then figured out that the wires had broken. So I bought a soldering iron and I fixed it. So now I am the dad who can fix.
So that's awesome. Congratulations.
Okay.
I did a blog post a couple days ago called Tiny Victories.
Yes, I saw that.
That was directly as a result of me soldering 2 wires together.
There you go.
We're trying to make a quadcopter, and the 7-year-old has no concept that this is probably not going to work out. You know what I mean? Because we printed out the legs, so he's seen the legs, which means he's seen progress.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's going to attach to that. It's going to be huge. And he's like, oh, when are we flying it? I'm like, well, I need to get the thing to light up first. And then in order to do that, these 2 wires need to be so yeah, it's going to be a couple of months. So tiny victories, tiny victories.
Hopefully he'll learn to appreciate just how much work goes into stuff. Like my wife and I constantly will buy the latest cheap piece of garbage that we got from wherever, right? When I say cheap, like just in mind, when you consider what goes into it, it's cheap. Like, I paid $25 for this T-shirt, and you hold it up and you go, well, if I had to grow the cotton, and then you work forward from there, and you go, my God, this is cheap.
Yes.
How can they possibly afford? It's the economies of scale and world trade and global this, that. And it still fascinates me when I hold up a frying pan, which cost me $20 at Costco. And I go, how did this get dug out of the ground as ore and turned into this frying pan for a mere $19.99? Like, it still blows my mind.
I'm trying to make this project where if the garage door is left open, I think I did it once before. I'm trying to do it in different ways in different IoT systems. If the garage door is left open, it'll text me that I left the garage door open. This happened this morning. Okay. I drove away to take the kids to school, left the garage door open. Yep. So if the thing it's taped to the garage door goes up like this, and it stays in that orientation for 5 minutes, it texts me, and then the garage door goes down.
They're running one.
Well, so I'm going to do it. I'm doing it multiple times. John Gallant did this. He says, pick an awesome IoT project, and then pick 3 or 4 different IoT things, and then do the same project each time. This is a Tessel.
Okay.
Which is an appropriately small, and then this is an XYZ accelerometer deal. That's an appropriate way to do it. I'm also going to try your friend.
Yep.
Because why not install an entire version of Windows and the .NET framework in order to?
Of course.
Yeah. So to your point, when you think about this is 50 years of engineering that we are standing on top of, so that I might just not forget to leave my automatic garage door opener.
Let alone the other half of that solution, which is the whole cellular network that then pushes the thing to your phone.
It is peak 0th world problems.
Negative world, I think, at this point.
Yeah. All righty. So we are Scott and Damien, and John is not here. And this is the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. That was the content-free portion of the beginning of the show.
That's pretty much how this always starts.
But we start recording earlier now, right? This is becoming like a talk show. And while Hansel Minutes, my podcast, encourages a lack of wasting of time, with this show, we actually do the hey, how's it going? See the mess? See the mess my kids left in my office right there. John's not here; he's got to work. But I do have community stuff for him. Good. But before we do community stuff and look at all of that, what do you have, sir? What's going on in ASP.NET right now?
So what's going on? We're halfway through the coding milestone for Beta 8. Beta 8 is going to have a lot of stuff in it. I just pulled up like one of the repos. I pulled up the DNX repo and I opened the issues and I filtered them to the Beta 8 milestone. and there's still like 47 open issues. So there's a lot, and that's just in DNX. That doesn't include like MVC and EF and all the various middlewares and DI and Kestrel and all the other stuff. There's a lot of work going on in Beta 8. Beta 8 is going to be a big release. I spoke last week about the hosting and IIS change. There's an announcement going up on the announcements repo about that, hopefully by the end of today, if not early tomorrow. We're just drafting that now. Only one change from what we announced last week is that the web listener server and the underlying code under that will actually continue. So we're still getting rid of the dedicated IIS host, which was called Helios, which actually represented a complete second DNX host and all the problems that come along with maintaining two sets of code bases that practically did the same thing but just in different ways. Whereas Web Listener is just another server, and it is very much just like Kestrel. It plugs into the pipeline, it sits on top of the common hosting library, and then your ASP.NET app runs on the other side of that. So we're going to continue making Web Listener available. The other thing about the Web Listener code base is that it's also usable outside of DNX/ASP.NET 5 applications. So it actually represents a spiritual successor to HTTP Listener, which is the API that exists in .NET itself. So Web Listener is effectively a new out-of-band and improved version of that code base. And you'll be able to use it to host ASP.NET 5 apps in self-host scenarios on Windows, or you'll be able to use it in sort of traditional .NET applications as well. Now, remember, Web Listener is an HTTP SYS-based web server. The big difference between Web Listener and Kestrel, other than one is cross-plat and the other one isn't, Web Listener is built on HTTP SYS, which means that all the HTTP parts of that API actually happen in native code down in the kernel mode driver. Whereas in Kestrel sits on top of sockets, and then everything else is managed. Everything on top of that is managed. So everything to do with HTTP, how we parse the requests and put it in the headers and dispatch it off the app, that is completely managed code base. And it runs cross-platform as well. So we can do a lot more in Kestrel because most of it is managed code, whereas in Web Listener, all we can really do is call into the existing sort of Windows API, and there's really not much more we can do than that. But it enables a couple of features that we can't otherwise get, so we will have both available for customers. So there's that change. I was looking at some performance stuff again today. I was just on the Smurf Lab looking at Kestrel on Linux on .NET Core, because we shipped our first version of .NET Core for Linux in Beta 7. So I was updating the Linux server machine and getting all that running. It's not particularly fast right now, so we've got some investigation to do. And I literally just figured that out sort of 3 minutes before I jumped on this call. But that's good fun. Ben, what's his face? From the Age of Ascent, Iliad Games, the guy who helped send us that Rio experimental server, the registered IO server. I mean, we talked about that in one of the community stand-ups a while ago. The one that was getting crazy numbers, like 7 million requests per second. He has now been taking that server and adding ASP.NET 5 support on top of it. And in the process, he's profiling some of our core ASP.NET 5 intrinsics and helping us highlight areas for investigation and potential memory savings, like introducing things like memory or object pooling, and getting drastic and very massive performance benefits as a result. So we have a lot of great investigative work going on in performance from the community, as well as on our side, which is really cool. We're doing a lot of memory allocation work in MVC and Razor at the moment as well, really trying to tighten up how we allocate memory, pooling memory, which is something you really have to think about when doing servers. So you're not just always allocating memory and causing the GC to have to do a lot of work. So we're doing a lot of work at that at the moment.
When you do stuff like that, what is that green field, blue sky, with I don't know what the white word is, but haven't we done that before with ASP.NET originally?
Kind of. So again, because ASP.NET originally was based on top of IIS predominantly, a lot of that work was done below us in the server. Now, that we certainly did certain aspects of pooling in ASP.NET full before, but we have a much more of an end-to-end stack now that we own, and we've had a chance to design this thing end-to-end and make some API considerations and design considerations with these type of things in mind. And we have much higher performance goals this time around than we had previously with ASP.NET. I think that's fair to say. And so we're looking at some of these things a lot closer than we had in the past. Now, it's very hard to build generic reusable structures that anyone can use and get the maximum performance benefit out. So when we talk about pooling, for example, some people might point to existing types in the CLR or in the base class library and say, oh, why don't you just use that type? So, well, most of the stuff in the CLR and the BCL is designed to be generic. When you have very highly specialized scenarios like, we're writing a server to be a generic web server framework, we can generally do a better job of those things if we tailor data structures and APIs specifically for our needs, and we can take shortcuts and optimize paths that you couldn't otherwise in a generic sort of API that has to be distilled down to match the various scenarios that it's trying to do. So we're looking at all those things at the moment, which is kind of fun. We removed a couple of things that we decided weren't going to make it in for 1.0. So if people want to know what they are, or as always, go to the announcements repo and look at the breaking changes. It's just worth calling out every week, because as we get towards sort of the crunch period for this RTM, especially in this release, in beta 8, you will see some things drop off. And I think most of them are fairly sort of esoteric and around the edge pieces, nothing fundamental. But if you had, inadvertently or started looking at some of those things, you might find that they've gone away because we've decided that we just don't have the time to get them up to the standard that we want for an RTM, which means we'll circle back and do them afterwards. But check that list for that. Some things I'm looking at here that we're finally getting around to doing. So the DNX watch, this is the ability to be doing, while you're developing, have something that's watching your application so that when you make a code change, it automatically refreshes it for you. If you're in Visual Studio, VS does this for you today. VS is the thing that launches IS Express. When it detects a code change, DNX shuts itself down, and then Visual Studio starts up IS Express again, and by the time you get over to your browser and you refresh the page, hopefully it's already running. If you're not in VS, that experience didn't really exist today. Some community members had patched this together with various types of scripts. We will be building a first-class feature for that with a new global command called DNX-watch. And effectively, DNX-watch is a complete replacement for DNX at the command line. So if you want to do local development, you're running DNX space web or something at the command line, or Kestrel, or whatever your command is, and you're doing active development, just replace DNX with DNX-watch, and you'll get the same thing, but it'll restart every time you change code. So you can just be in VS Code or Sublime, make a code change, hit save, go back to the browser, hit F5, and your code change will be live.
And the reason that that's not like a DNS-watch is because it's really a wrapper that's kicking DNX, and then DNX comes back up when it.
So there's a couple of reasons. One of them is that it's better to have this as an out-of-proc thing that can launch the process and then sort of coordinate when it starts and stops by looking at the various exit commands and exceptions that come out of it. The other part is just kind of that whole Unix philosophy of small tools, joined together makes a blah, 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 blah. I don't know the exact words, but you know what I'm talking about. The philosophy of having a bunch of small tools that you then join together to make a larger cohesive set, rather than trying to build one tool like DNX that has all these various switches and knobs and you have to know how to use them. We build lots of small tools that you can use together, and we're using the global commands feature of DNU, which is part of this DNX sort of platform, to build these tools. So we have user secrets, which we did quite a while ago. EF has a tool that comes in as part of your app, and DNX Watch will just be the latest of one of those global tools that you'll use from the command line and install itself using DNU. So there's that. There's more work going on cross-plat and beta 8, so the .NET team will be doing specifically lighting up a lot more features on cross-plat, like globalization will light up, some improvements to networking and HTTP client. I mean, we got a lot of stuff working in beta 7, but there's a lot more work happening. Crypto work, you'll just see a lot of that stuff get better as we get into beta 8, and then obviously after that into the RC. Let me have a look down here. We're doing some work with Azure, so we're trying to improve the deployment time and startup time when you deploy your ASP.NET 5 application to Azure. And that doesn't matter whether you're using Visual Studio to do your publish, which we know a lot of customers do. They publish directly from VS using the publish dialog straight to Azure, or using Kudu and the source control deployment feature of Azure Web Apps. They are fairly different in the way they go about getting your app from where you are onto the machine and running. So we have to sort of treat them differently and optimize differently for certain aspects of that. So we're doing a lot of work around that as well. What else? There's some NuGet work coming along as well. We haven't forgot about things like CS project referencing X project. So if you're in VS and you want to have a C# class library based on CS proj referencing a DNX or X proj based class library, that work is happening, and we will have that, if not by beta 8, certainly by RTM. So that work has started. They're probably the big things, and if I very much encourage people to go and look at the beta 8 milestones and all the repos, especially the DNX repo that has a lot of really core stuff that's going on, to get an idea of the type of work we're doing right now for beta 8. Oh, we're building a new website too. So we've done live.asp.net. We're building a couple actually. We're building a new website that we plan to run on Linux in Azure, so that we feel all the pain and of running live sites on both Windows and on Linux in a cloud environment, so that we can try and make the best tooling sort of end-to-end experience and runtime experience for that. That one's going to be a link, a redirector, sort of a shortener / redirector, go.asp.net. And the other one will be a new acquisition site where you'll go to actually get the bits. Like today, it's a combination of you get some stuff in VS, or you go and read the docs and sort of curl down a bash script or a PowerShell script, or you might go to the Microsoft Download Center and hit that download link, and they get presented with 27 different options because there's lots of different languages for VS. We're going to build a new sort of landing page for ASP.NET 5, which will be at get.asp.net. Doesn't exist yet, so don't bother going there yet. But by RC, we plan to have that up and running, and we hope that will be as a simple sort of go to that site, hit the big green install button, and you'll get a customized installer for the OS that you're currently running on. But there'll also be a secondary link that lets you go to like a huge matrix of various bits to download, and you can choose exactly what you want and download them that way. And you'll also still have the option of like doing a curl script and starting with absolutely nothing, doing a very.
Since this is since this is a real stand-up, and we're all about transparency here, right? You don't know this, but I met with a bunch of designers. We're working on kind of redesigning some of the look and feel of www.asp.net. And she is happy to help you with get.asp.net. We showed her live, and we want to come up with a visual language for all of those. So I'll email you after this, introduce you to her, and we'll make sure that live, get, and www all kind of look the same way and are responsive and yada, yada, yada.
Perfect.
That way, design, you don't have to think about that part.
Right. That's fantastic. So it'll actually have two parts. That reminds me. So one, obviously, the UX part and like the human interaction part. The other part about Get ASP.NET will be hosting feeds for things like apt-get. And so we will have a Debian / apt-get feed that will be hosted up at that location. It will actually be a CDN URL, but that'll all be in Azure. And so we'll be using all these tools to build the things that you use to get them. So that's good.
Shiny. That's good.
I hope we get to build more stuff. Building stuff makes us build better product, usually. So
cool. Yeah. Do you want to go over the John stuff?
Yes. Do you have the John stuff with you?
I do.
Okay.
I don't have any questions coming in yet, but if they do, we'll do them. Tell me when you can see this.
I can see that.
All right. So first, Taylor, who wrote Shooter, if you've ever seen that game from the SignalR game, Taylor and Rick Anderson did an article on tag helpers. And that article is up on docs.asp.net.
Okay.
Have you seen this yet?
Yeah.
So this is probably the kind of the longest, most detailed thing we have on tag helpers right now.
And yeah, this is just the beginning, to be clear too. Like we've got a lot more to come along. So
you'll notice that this one just talks about authoring.
Yeah.
The ones with a little wrench by them are not done yet. So advanced using introductions, this is all up for change. But the nice thing, of course, if you've never done anything with GitHub before, maybe this, oh, actually, why is that not 404ing?
Are you signed in?
Not here.
That's probably why.
Shouldn't 404 though.
You clicked edit though. Maybe edit actually tries to create a fork. I don't know.
Nope.
That's a good point. I don't know.
I'm signed in on both, so it's definitely weird. I will talk to Dan about that.
Yeah.
Anyway, in a perfect world, you click edit, and you'll be able to make changes. So people can come in here and like see it links to a site that doesn't yet exist. You can get involved. So a good way to get involved with ASP.NET is to start by helping with docs, even something as simple as a spelling error. Okay.
Okay. Yep.
That's one. ASP.NET 5 continuous integration from Git to Azure without Visual Studio.
Ooh.
The Macintosh stock photography. So this is an MS Build Xproj free deployment. Walks through the publish script, how that's going to work. It looks like PowerShell. Doesn't look like a Macintosh then. But
I love the fact that you call it a Macintosh. Like
it says Macintosh right there.
Like, I know, but I love the fact that you call it a Macintosh. Like, I think only people that are as old and use the original Macintosh, like you and me.
Oh.
Like, I grew up with the Macintosh in primary school, in elementary school.
Yeah.
But I think everyone calls them Macs. I haven't heard the word Macintosh used in that context for a while now.
Oh.
But that's nice. I feel nostalgic.
I'm very old. Thank you. You talked about DNX commands. Here is James Chambers on supporting options and arguments within your DNX commands.
Yes.
So
by using our code.
Real world. Here's an example. You'll notice that the EF stuff still includes the magic unicorn after all these years. Pretty excited about that. EF itself is a command, is it not?
It is.
But it is a command that takes arguments. So kind of explains how that works and talks about the Microsoft.framework.command line utils, how that works. So check that out, jameschambers.com. Tugberk, always got good content. Setting hosting environment is development. Talking about how is development works, when you set it, how you use it. We've talked about this before. Oh, and by the way, actually, let's see if this is up yet. Any minute now. Microsoft Virtual Academy. This was supposed to be done yesterday, but had a little bit of a technical thing. I want to see if it's up yet. No, should be up like in the next hour or two.
Okay.
Our show. Let me try to arrange by. Well, I don't know how to find the newest one. Well, I will tweet it. Follow me on Twitter, and I'll show you as soon as I know. But it should have been done Monday. We promised it would be done Monday. It should be done later today. It was submitted at 2:00 today.
Okay.
So check that out. Next one, Eric Anderson talking about migrating from 6 to 7. And now, as you point out, 7 to 8 is going to be a big deal soon.
Yeah.
Migrations are always interesting. Again, if you're watching and you haven't yet got to 6 or 7, if you haven't built anything, just file a new project and start from there. Not everyone is necessarily going build to build, but it is sometimes confusing when you do go to build to build. And fortunately, our bloggers are doing real detailed explanations, even as far as going into some of the internals of Entity Framework.
And as always, if you are doing that, check the announcements repo, because all breaking changes between those betas should be announced on the announcements repo. And by the way, I updated the live ASP.NET project to beta 7, and it was pretty much painless.
So do you think it'll be harder with 8?
I don't think so. Like I said, most of the stuff that's changing in 8 isn't sort of mainline. There'll be a lot more stuff coming on board, but not stuff that we've changed as much from previous versions. So, and a lot of the stuff changing is just under the covers, make stuff faster, tighter, better, that type of stuff.
Okay. So there's one link I'm missing here. CI, options, hosting environment, migrations, tag helpers, and where's the other one? I will go back. I'll switch this camera back to you, so we'll stare at you for a second while I find that.
Okay. I can read these questions and prepare my answers.
Options groups. Oh, options groups. That was it.
Okay.
Here it is. You see that?
Yep.
Using option groups, which is kind of a complicated bit of HTML, with the select tag helper and MVC 6. So opt group lets you take options within a select and then group them. So in this case, he's going to group them by manufacturer country, rather than just being and the opt group from a polish perspective, it's a very old tag, but it's surprisingly unused.
Yep.
Does something as simple as that. Nice little bit of polish. And when you're doing this on mobile devices, by the way, it really, really shines. But he's basically changing the select tag helper to support that feature.
Oh, wow. Okay.
See? So here you got select ID vehicle, adds all that stuff, the opt group, walks through how he's doing it, and internals. It might be something to pull in, frankly.
I thought we did support it. Did he actually change it, or is he just showing you how to do
it?
I think he's just showing. I don't know. I thought we actually did support it.
Then that would be my mistake then. Okay. I see. Pardon me. I discuss one particular feature for the select type. So he's showing us how to use it and giving it. Then kudos to you, Damien, for actually doing it. So,
well, the dev team, but yes.
And the team. Yeah, I apologize.
Yes.
All right, let's go through the questions.
Okay. When will Glimpse be available for ASP.NET V Next? When it's done.
Hello.
My understanding is the Glimpse guys are planning to have a release in step with us. So when we RC, that they'll have a suitable Glimpse release around that time as well. I think they have something available now. I thought they had a preview. I want to say they have a preview already, and then Anthony or Nick can tell me if I'm lying. But they are working very hard on it. I know that much because we do meet with them regularly. But they will have something out along with when we do. Would it be possible using tag helpers to build an each attribute that could then provide variables to the inner scope, similar to the each attribute in the Spark View engine? No, that is not a feature in the first version of tag helpers. That will be something we're looking to do in the next version of tag helpers. That requires a tag helper to be able to participate in code generation, which a web forms control can do by way of the control builder class in web forms, which gives a web control the ability to, when the page is being compiled, and what I mean by that is when the ASPX or the .cshtml page is being compiled and turned into a C# file that then gets compiled into an assembly, because it's ultimately all .NET. At that point, which only ever happens once for the life of the application generally, the control itself can get involved. Tag helpers can't do that. We do want to add that in the future. So the best you can do right now is you can pass in state to a tag helper by a property on the tag helper / attribute. And then the tag helper obviously is free to mutate that state. So as long as the caller of the tag helper creates that state and has a reference to it and then passes it into the tag helper, the tag helper can sort of move the cursor forward. For example, in that case, you could pass it in items, you could pass it in a variable, and then have a context object, for example, and then it could move the context.currentItem property to the current one as it enumerates through them and calls the template back. A little clunky, I know, but in order to do anything better, tag helpers have to support code generation. The reason you can do that in Spark is that Spark is all code generation. Spark is completely based on code generation from the get-go, whereas Razor and tag helpers goes through a compilation phase, code generation into compile, and then a whole bunch of stuff is done at runtime, which is just too late to do this type of stuff. So not now, but coming soon, or coming in the future, I should say. Any word on Gulp support for Azure website support for ASP.NET 5? Sean, I'm not aware of any problem on that. My understanding is Gulp and Grunt are both installed by default on Azure web apps and such. If you're using them in ASP.NET 5, I use them on live ASP.NET, for example, and I deploy it via Kudu to Azure websites, and it works just fine. So I'm not quite sure what the specific issue is there. Works for me. If you've got any login issue on the home repo, if you think, or on the Kudu repo, if you know it's specific to that. And any new information on Identity Server partnership? Nothing new from what Scott Hunter here spoke about a couple of weeks ago when we talked about that. Damien, is there a way to change the DNX install location out of user profile to somewhere else, app data, and why not? We just brought that up again today. So we've spoken about it here again on the community stand-up a while ago, about why does DNX go into user profile /.dnx. We are revisiting that for beta 8. The reason we've been holding off is that we wanted to move both the DNX and the NuGet packages folder into app data. They both go in various folders on the user profile now. If we were going to make the move, we wanted to move just once and coordinate those things. That's still on the books for beta 8. There's no guarantee it'll get in for beta 8, but our intention right now seems to be leaning towards changing that location from user profile to app data, which is what I think the overwhelming feedback from customers was that we should do. So that is on the books. We've answered that one. And lastly, did you compare performance of Kestrel versus Web Listener? We did. And actually, I don't think I put the Web Listener results up on the GitHub repo. That might be my fault. Let me just double check.
Very exciting if we can do that.
We certainly did. Kestrel is faster. So Web Listener is inherently limited because it runs on top of HTTP sys, and we can't change HTTP sys. It's part of Windows. More to the point, because HTTP sys is all calls to HTTP sys are system calls, because HTTP sys is a kernel level API. Every time you want to make a request, you say, I want to handle this request, then I want to write out to the socket, I want to write out to the response. You're making a system call in order to do that. One of the biggest parts about optimizing .NET servers is reducing the number of system calls that you make. So for example, when we've talked about pipelining on this show before, and the effects that pipelining have in HTTP and some of the efficiencies that affords. If you can't change the number of system calls that you make when you have to read bytes, pipelining doesn't really help you an awful lot. And we see that when we run load tests against IIS and HTTP sys-based servers, with and without pipelining enabled, you don't see much difference because you just can't change the number of system calls, which is one of the biggest overheads that you have to deal with. It doesn't mean we can't make Web Listener faster. We certainly could. And we certainly will, there's a lot of affordances we'll have because there's work we have to do in the shared components, like in the hosting layer and in ASP.NET 5 itself. There's a lot of performance work to do there as well. But Kestrel, as it is right now, is once you enable pipelining, is quite a lot faster. It's about 60% faster than Web Listener, about 50% actually right now. And Kestrel will get much faster as we move forward. Right now, our current goal for Kestrel is to I think did I talk about this last week? I don't know if I did. We reran Scala on Windows with the 10 gigabit Ethernet, and I posted new benchmarks results on the benchmarks repo last week. Probably didn't talk about that because it was after that.
Do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, sure. See if my computer will cope with me doing that.
Or I can do it.
Let me do it. That one. Okay, sharing, chugging, grinding. Is that?
Yep.
Can you see me? All
Yes.
good? Okay, so here, let me scroll back up to the top. I added a section for the experimental baselines. So these are servers that aren't really servers. These are very, so basically they're ways that we test stacks. So C# on top of libuv, C# on top of registered IO or Rio, and then Hammer, which is native HTTP.sys. And so you can see the results there. This is the second result here, Hammer raw HTTP sys, that's with pipelining. Mm-hmm. The fastest we could get was about 460,000 requests per second through HTTP sys. Mm-hmm. And that's with a native, that's the minimum amount of native code calling, that's not even IIS. And that's not even a native module, it's just C++ calling into HTTP sys with an exe. And then you can see libuv on top of C#, when we pipeline, we get 6 times that amount. And then Rio, we get double that again. Okay, so we can get yeah. Now that's, again, these aren't HTTP servers, or HTTP sys obviously is, but as I said in the beginning, Ben, who contributed the Rio server, has been working on adding ASP.NET 5 support, and I think as of this morning, he made some memory allocation changes to some of the parts of ASP.NET and got Rio server running part of ASP.NET 5 at about 1.7 million requests a second or something ridiculous, which is 10 times faster than what we have Kestrel running right now. So if I scroll down, here's plain text. So now we've got real stacks, ASP.NET 4.6, IIS static file, cached, kernel cached and non-kernel cached, Node.js on Windows, ASP.NET 5 on Kestrel, that's the one I added. Now this is not pipelining, this is just normal HTTP requests. And Scala, which at this point is getting held up by the network card. And then if I go down to the next one, which is when we add HTTP pipelining, I'm only showing results for servers that actually showed an improvement when we add pipelining. So we see Node.js went up from 93,000 to 144,000. ASP.NET 5 on Kestrel went from 127,000 to about 170,000. And then Scala went from 176,000 to 1.5 million. Mm-hmm. So And undertow, which we haven't tested yet, but we see the results for on Tech and Power, is about twice as fast as Scala, if not more, on these benchmarks when you look at them on Tech and Power. So still a long way to go, but we're making progress.
Cool. That's really detailed. I like, again, this gets to doing it out in the open, how nice that is.
Yeah, I think so. It's good fun.
Yeah, it's good.
Any other, I think we've answered all the questions that are up there. Oh, actually, second one. Are you responsible for VSID issues with ASP.NET 5? Yes, those guys sitting right behind this wall here, same room as us. New classes via refactoring created in the wrong folder. Can we share IDE issues? Yes, so there is a tooling repo on the GitHub ASP.NET/tooling. You can log issues with the Visual Studio tooling for ASP.NET 5 on that repo, and they will get triaged and looked at by the ASP.NET 5 tooling team. Is it possible to load the Razor engine dynamically and then limit the assemblies it can load or use? Thinking of email engines. Yes, the Razor engine itself is standalone, and you can still use it outside of a DNX application. So it compiles for Net 4.5, and you can do the same things that people have done forever, which is write a custom Razor host. And the Razor host is actually what determines what assemblies can get referenced and all those type of things. The Razor engine is actually just very small. It's just the thing that knows how to parse a Razor file and emit C# based on the settings and the implementation that the host provides. There isn't really a default Razor host. There's one for MVC, and then there's the Razor engine. So if you want to do that, you write a Razor host, load up the Razor engine on top of it, and knock yourself out. You can certainly do that stuff. Will there be some AngularJS integration by default with an ASP.NET 5 template projects? No, I don't know. Maybe at some point.
There's two questions. There's two implied questions there. There's AngularJS integration by default, like the file new project template, right?
Maybe.
Versus maybe another implication that is like, how is Angular going to be awesome, and are we going to support Angular and make it awesome and things like that?
We're not really sure. So we did an initial bunch of investigation a while ago, like a long time ago, and you can see the result of that in the music store repo under the SPA folder, where I wrote some HTML helpers. This is before we even had tag helpers. And I wrote a bunch of Angular HTML helpers as an experiment to look at what we could do with server generation using using Razor, server generation of Angular templates. And it was kind of an interesting, you can get into an interesting model where you're using your C# server-side models to generate the database on the right-hand side with the app, and also using model binding in your web APIs, and then actually have that generate a lot of the client-side code, or at least the HTML, I should say, and the Angular sort of directive syntax using helpers and using the server-side model. We still plan to circle back and visit that. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if you see us ramp up on that again over the coming months, and perhaps show some demos on that in the coming months. Whether it ends up being something by default, I'm not sure. So for those helpers that I wrote, I did actually write them with the idea that you would use them all the time, even if you weren't using Angular like consciously. Just like today, our helpers use jQuery validation and in the client and jQuery. Without you even thinking about using jQuery, our helpers emit markup that then is used by jQuery validation and our little unobtrusive shim to do client-side validation. I wrote those helpers to do the exact same thing, but with Angular. So even if you're not using Angular in the client per se, like you're not writing Angular code, you can be fully server-based, but have all the client-side validation, use Angular using all the Angular nice form validation semantics, just by way of the Razor helpers that you use. So that's certainly possible. I'm not going to say we'd never do that. We could certainly end up doing that, but we don't have any firm plans for when and exactly what that would look like right yet. I think that's it. We've answered all the questions.
Magical. We did it.
Oh, that's
cool.
Right.
So there you go. Looking at the schedule briefly, I'm going to come up this week and I'll hang out with you.
Okay.
I will be in Finland and Italy next week. So if there's any Finns or Italians that want to hang out, or any expats, I'm not sure what we'll do while Hunter and I are going to be in Sweden, Amsterdam, Poland, and Norway in October sometime.
Okay.
And then Vegas for Angle Brackets.
Then I'll be in Vegas. So.
Oh yeah, so we'll miss a couple of start some things. We
Yes.
are looking at a way to come up with some kind of a verified YouTube or some kind of an ASP.NET or .NET specific YouTube, so we don't have to be doing it on my YouTube all the time. We're still figuring that out.
Yes.
Because it clutters up my YouTube, and it doesn't look official. But it's not.
And we need you to do it, because if you're not
well,
here,
and also you need me to be able to do it, because I haven't figured out how to delegate the creation of a Hangout.
Yeah.
That said, we'll figure it out.
Yep.
Let's prepare for the dramatic zoom out.
I am ready, sir.
All right, engage. Bum, 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 bum. Intel Pentium processors.